Hey guys, tonight we're creeping into the flickering shadows of an old Ming Dynasty alleyway. There's a damp chill in the air, a sickly sweet scent of rotting fruit, and under your threadbare cloak, something is clinking in glass bottles. Mercury, sulfur, powdered lead. Not exactly bedtime tea. You're an alchemist. Not one of the glamorous types from myths who conjure gold out of thin air or live forever sipping elixirs of immortality. No, your version involves a lot more lung damage, legal danger, and hiding. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking quickly, not running that draws too much attention. The moon's high, and your breath curls in front of you like ghost vapor. You've just left the back room of an apothecary in Nanjing, and you're clutching a wrapped satchel of mercury in one hand, ginger root and bat guano in the other. A normal night. Your lamp is out. You don't want to be seen. Ming China's ruling elite doesn't exactly approve of your hobby. Confucian scholars think alchemy is nonsense at best, treasonous witchcraft at worst, and the emperor, well, he's interested only when it works. When it fails, he starts issuing orders for people to disappear. The thing is, you're not entirely insane. Some of what you're working with is actually early chemistry acids, alkalis, metals, sublimation processes. But good luck explaining that to the neighborhood official who saw you carting red cinnabar powder across town like some demonic apothecary. Right now, you're returning to your rented basement. You've converted it into a crude lab with bamboo shelves, a sand furnace, and walls stained by countless small explosions. Above you, a paper screen separates you from the street. You can hear someone hawking fermented tofu. You slip inside. You light the oil lamp with a flint snap, and suddenly the room feels like your own secret cave. You take a moment to breathe in the warm, smoky air. There's comfort here, in your little hell. Tonight's project a formula scrawled in chicken blood on aged parchment. It's supposed to help metals transmute into purified states some obscure reference to Taoist inner alchemy. You don't really believe the metaphor stuff, but the formula's from a banned Tang Dynasty scroll. And that means it's either brilliant, dangerous, or fake. Possibly all three. You reach into your sack and pull out the mercury. It glows slightly in the lamplight. Beautiful. Deadly. You remember the stories. Court alchemists who went mad after years of inhaling its fumes. One legend tells of a man who claimed he saw ghosts in the fumes and spoke to the moon. He died with his lungs looking like boiled fish. You try not to think about it as you heat the furnace. The bellows creak. The sand under the crucible begins to shimmer. You whisper a small prayer, more habit than belief. Historians still argue whether Ming alchemists like you truly believed they could make gold, or whether it was all metaphor for moral transformation. But honestly, you just need rent money and protection from the local magistrate. Your hands move fast, practiced. You mix the mercury with powdered sulfur and something called dragon bone. It's really just fossilized animal matter. But the name sounds cool. The reaction is quick, too quick. There's a crackle, then a puff of thick blue smoke. You lurch back, covering your face with a damp cloth. Your eyes water. The back of your throat itches. Once the smoke clears, you peer into the crucible. Inside is a black lump. No gold, no silver, nothing shiny. Just scorched failure. You sigh and sit back. You've failed again. That's attempt number 217. But it's not all bad. Failure means you're still alive. You haven't accidentally vaporized yourself or brewed a poison potent enough to kill half the street. You've seen that happen. It wasn't pretty. The smell alone. You open the tiny window for ventilation. Outside, There's a soft rain beginning, tapping against the wood frame, somewhere not far. A bell rings twice. Curfew. You're not supposed to be awake, much less melting dangerous elements together in the dark. But if you're caught, you have a cover story. You're a herbalist. Technically true. If your definition of herbal includes things like crushed scorpion and monkshood root, you glance at the small scroll tucked into the corner of your lab, a copy of pureposes, the ancient Taoist alchemical manual. One phrase is circled in red. He who controls mercury controls life. You chuckle softly. You control nothing. Not mercury. Not your rent. And definitely not life. Still, you'll try again tomorrow. Or tonight, if the fumes don't knock you out first. That's the alchemist's way. You fail. You cough. You keep going. And maybe your next experiment won't blow a hole in the floorboards. You're running out of rugs to cover those. Gold or death. That's the arrangement, more or less. You've never signed a contract that says it outright. But everyone in your position knows the rules. If the Emperor sends for an alchemist, it's because he wants either eternal life or an endless supply of gold. Deliver one, or you disappear like smoke from a blown-out lamp. You don't need to imagine what happens to failures. You remember one. His name was Guo. Old, hunched, always smelled like burnt bamboo and pickled garlic. Said he could coax gold from copper using deer marrow and something he called thunder ash. He got invited to a court demonstration, big deal. Red robes, guards watching with spears. 3 days later, they found his workshop abandoned, his name scratched from the temple records, and a new fish market built where his house used to stand. You don't talk about Guo. Now, you're in the exact same position, except younger, slightly less hunched, and only mildly flammable. You've just been approached by an envoy from a local noble. His master has connections to the inner palace, and he wants to see your work. Impressive results will be rewarded, he said, smiling, and failure will not be misunderstood. Cool, no pressure. You've spent the last few days obsessing over ratios, rereading ancient texts by Ge Hong and Wei Boyang Ming legends in your field. You even tried fasting, just in case that made your mind more spiritually attuned. All it did was give you headaches and make your hands shaky during lab work. Historians still argue whether court-backed alchemists were actual scientists or just exploited magicians. Most of your ingredients wouldn't pass modern lab safety checks. Your mercury's impure. Your arsenic harvested from local cave powder. And you recently discovered your gold dust supplier may actually be selling you mica flakes mixed with powdered turmeric. You think about quitting, just becoming a pharmacist. Maybe selling licorice root to old ladies. But then you remember what it felt like the first time you extracted silver specks from a black mass, using nothing but heat and time. It felt like magic. Dangerous. Illegal. Mind-bending magic, but still magic. So tonight, you're trying again. You mix a little realgar into your crucible arsenic sulfide. Bright orange. A powder so poisonous it could probably kill a camel with a sneeze. You remember a fringe recipe that claims heating realgar with honey and mercury in a sealed flask will yield a silver egg. That's code for metallic beads. You've never seen it done. You lock your door, wedge a sandal under the crack to keep fumes from drifting out. Your ventilation system is just a bamboo tube poking through a roof tile. Totally safe. As the fire grows, the mixture inside bubbles like demonic soup. The smell alone is enough to send lesser men to the next life. It's a blend of sulfur, singed hair, and something uncomfortably like burnt flesh. You cover your mouth and peek into the reaction chamber. Nothing yet. The pressure builds, then a sharp hiss. You lunge back as a pop echoes through the room. A tiny puff of smoke bursts from the flask's lip. You think, just for a second, that you see something glimmering inside the mix. You wait, then slowly, You use a hooked rod to drag the container into a sand bath. Cooling it, your heart thuds. Carefully, you open the lid. Inside is a bead. Not gold, not even silver, but not nothing either. It's heavy, shiny, maybe an alloy. Maybe if you can polish it just right, it might pass for something valuable. Just enough to impress someone who wants to be impressed. You feel the first flicker of hope in days. You might be able to fake your way through this court meeting. Then you sneeze. Hard. Once, twice, 3 times. Ah, Realgar exposure. You forgot gloves again. That's the thing about being an alchemist in Ming China on any given day. Your biggest concern might not be the emperor. It might be your own lack of common sense. Still, you put the bead in a small silk pouch, seal it with wax, and tuck it into your belt. Tomorrow, you meet the nobleman. Maybe it'll be fine. Maybe he'll see your skill, reward you with silver, offer patronage, or maybe he'll smile politely, take the bead, and have your workshop raided while you're still walking home. You get in bed, still dizzy, the candles flickering. You think you hear someone outside the window, but maybe that's just your ears ringing. You remember something your teacher once said in alchemy. Every success is a lie that lives just long enough to be useful. You hope this one lives a little longer than most. You wake up to a headache that feels like a metal rod's been jammed into your skull and twisted for good measure. Not surprising. Mercury fumes do that. You try to sit up, but your balance tilts, and for a terrifying moment, the floor seems to sway like a boat. You stagger to your feet. In the dim morning light, your lab looks like a war zone, scorch marks on the wall, empty flasks lying like broken eggshells, and your bamboo ventilation pipe now slightly melted at the end. Great. That'll take a week to fix. You shuffle over to the basin, splash cold water on your face, and try not to think about your nosebleed. It's probably the mercury. Again, it always comes back to the mercury. The ancient texts revere it quicksilver, the divine metal, flowing like water, immune to decay. They claimed it could bind with gold, cleanse the body, and purify the spirit. It was considered a bridge between the earthly and celestial realms, a sacred tool, a god metal, and it is. To an extent, it's mesmerizing. It dances when you tilt the flask, reflecting the lamplight like liquid mirrors. But it also destroys. By now, you've seen what long exposure does. You're not just talking about tremors and hallucinations, though those come too. It starts small, shaky hands, memory lapses, weird dreams, then paranoia, mood swings, and eventually, a look in the eyes like the person's no longer home. You've seen it happen to a respected herbalist 2 streets over. He tried to kiss a stone lion and claimed it whispered the secrets of lead. The worst part, most of you know the risks. You still use it. Historians still argue whether Ming alchemists were just naive about the dangers of mercury, or whether they truly believed its power outweighed its costs. The records are contradictory. Some recipes mention purification rituals and protective prayers, while others casually instruct you to inhale the fumes under moonlight. That might explain why you've recently taken to seeing tiny flashes in the corner of your eye. They vanish when you turn your head. You try to ignore it, but not today. Today, you're due to present your silver egg to the nobleman's assistant at the Eastern Pavilion. You wrap the polished bead in silk, bow to your shrine because you need all the help you can get, and step into the sunlight. The city is already humming vendors yelling about boiled dumplings, children chasing each other through narrow lanes, and the distant ring of a temple bell. You navigate the crowd carefully, keeping your pouch tucked close. When you reach the pavilion, it's quiet, too quiet. The guard at the door eyes you, says nothing, and gestures you in. Inside is a man in a crisp green robe. sipping tea with the exaggerated calm of someone who could end your life with a hand wave. You bow low. You present the bead. He inspects it slowly, rolling it between his fingers like he's testing its soul. Then, without a word, he stands, opens a side panel in the floor, and drops the bead into a small furnace. You blink. Sir, if it holds its shine, he says, we may have a future together. You wait in silence. The flame flickers. The air thickens. Finally, he pulls out the crucible. Inside, the bead survived but slightly dulled. Not gold, not silver, but clearly not worthless either. He nods. You'll deliver 10 more. Each different, each better. You bow again. But before you leave, he adds, and do avoid making yourself insane. I prefer my servants coherent. You walk out with shaky knees. That was almost encouraging. In a very Ming Dynasty, veiled threats kind of way. That night, you sit by your furnace again. The mercury sits sealed in a porcelain jar, glowing faintly in the firelight. You think about stopping, about flushing it into the earth and moving on to safer brews. But it calls to you. Not literally, you're not that far gone. Yet, you open your journal, scratch a few notes, then pause. You draw a little symbol, a pattern from a half-translated scroll. It's part star, part spiral. You're not sure what it means yet, but it feels right. You blow out the lamp and lie down. The scent of mercury lingering in your nose like a secret. Sleep comes slowly. Your dreams shimmer. You're working by moonlight again. It's not that you're trying to be romantic, it's just that your landlord cut off your oil ration after the last fire. So here you are, crouched beside the furnace with only moonbeams slicing through the window slats and the flicker of embers for company. You're on a temp number. What is it now, maybe 230? You stopped counting after 200. The noble's request hangs over your head like a sword made of paperwork and poison. 10 beads, each different, each better. You'd settle for not exploding. Tonight, you're trying a different ratio. 3 parts cinnabar, 2 parts honey, 1 crushed locust shell, and a pinch of mysterious yellow powder labeled only phoenix dust. You suspect it's just powdered turmeric mixed with camphor. But hey, branding matters. As you stir the paste into the crucible, your mind drifts dangerous, but unavoidable. You think of the old masters, Zhang Zhongjing, who practically invented Chinese pharmacology. Gei Hong, the legendary immortalist who mixed alchemy and Taoism like it was a punch cocktail. Did they ever sit like this, bent over a sputtering furnace? Eyes burning, wondering if the next concoction would be their legacy or their obituary. Historians still argue whether Taoist alchemy was ever truly intended to produce physical immortality, or if it was a coded language for spiritual transcendence. You lean toward both. After all, metaphors are great, but emperors usually want results that glitter and jingle. The mixture starts to bubble. You lean in cautiously, holding your breath. You've learned not to inhale deeply when something begins to froth. Last time, your eyebrows paid the price. They're still uneven. You remember the fringe recipe this one's based on? Found it on a ragged scroll at a second-hand market near the Yangtze. The seller called it laughing gold. He claimed it came from a river priest who once turned bamboo into silver and frogs into porcelain. Highly unlikely. Still, you paid for it 3 copper coins and a promise not to ask where it came from. As the crucible glows, a curious smell fills the room, spicy, like gingerbread left in a cave. Not awful, which is rare. You dare to peek closer. Inside, the mixture has begun to separate flecks of shimmering orange rising through a milky white film. You blink. That's new. Then it starts to hum, a soft, low vibration, like a distant temple bell, muffled by mountains and memory. You freeze. Sound is never good. Silence is safe. Sound means pressure. Sure enough, pop the crucible cracks. A thin line forms on its side, and a hiss of steam escapes. You grab the tongs and lift it clear just in time. It wobbles in the sand bath, like something alive inside is breathing its last. You stare, wide-eyed. What just happened wasn't in the scroll. You wait 10 minutes before unsealing the lid. What you find is strange, a gray lump, cold to the touch, but dense. You chip a piece off and rub it against your stone plate. It leaves a faint trail of metallic sheen, not quite silver, not lead, something in between. You hold it up to the moonlight. For a moment, it gleams with faint green shimmer. Not valuable, probably, but it might pass as a talisman, the kind of thing you could market as a soul-stabilizing metal. You scribble notes furiously. You've discovered something new or something very old that got lost along the way. Either way, it's yours now. Just then, a knock at the door. You freeze. It's well past curfew. You open the door a crack. Outside stands a small boy in ragged robes, eyes wide. "Message," he whispers, holding up a bamboo scroll. "From the house with painted screens, the noble's residence." You take the scroll and hand him a candied plum from your stash. He grins and scurries away. You unroll the scroll carefully. It reads, "Progress is expected. Delivery within 5 days. Our patience, unlike mercury, does not flow backward." Cute. Someone's been reading poetic treatises on Taoism. You sigh. Roll the scroll back up and look at the gray bead. Not impressive enough. Not yet. But something in you sparks. The humming, the green shimmer. That wasn't nothing. You decide to try combining it with another metal. Iron, maybe, or tin. You might be able to forge an alloy that looks more like precious ore. Maybe even feels like it. Of course, this means risking another explosion, possibly hallucinations, maybe a minor haunting. But what's alchemy without a few near-death experiences? You turn back to your furnace, stretch your aching neck, and whisper to yourself, just 5 more days. Then you light the flame again. You're not really sure when the line between alchemy and desperation blurred, but tonight, you're definitely on the wrong side of it. The workshop is a mosaic of chaos, shattered porcelain shards from failed experiments, scribbled paper strips with formulas you can no longer read because you spilled lotus oil on them, and the pungent aroma of something that might have once been yak lard simmering in vinegar. The smell alone could be considered a low-grade curse. Still, you're focused, laser-focused. You're melting tin now low heat, slow spiral motion, just like the Tang era guide recommends. You add a shaving of hematite red as dried blood and exactly 1 ground-up cicada shell, according to a fringe Taoist recipe. Cicadas symbolize transformation, longevity, and cosmic knowledge. According to your nose, they smell like burnt fingernails. This batch is part 5 of your bead series, and you're halfway to the deadline. The nobleman wants 10, each different. You've already submitted 2. 1 passed. 1 was met with polite silence, possibly a bad sign, but you're clinging to optimism like mold to damp scrolls. You pour the new mixture into a shallow bronze mold etched with characters you copied from a Tang tomb rubbing. As the metal cools, the markings seem to shimmer faintly. Then the dizziness starts again. Your hands tremble. You grip the edge of the work table, trying not to black out. You haven't eaten in maybe 2 days, possibly 3. It's hard to remember when every waking hour blurs into a single loop of grinding, boiling, pouring, testing, muttering, failing. Repeat. You remind yourself to eat something. Later. First, you check the bead. It's small, dense, with a slight reddish hue. You polish it carefully, and as you do, Something odd happens. The surface begins to show faint lines, not scratches lines, like veins, natural patterns that look eerily like the ones you saw in an old imperial mineral catalog labeled Heaven's Threads. You blink. Is this some weird reaction, or just your mercury-soaked brain throwing in a little visual jazz? Historians still argue whether these mineral veining patterns described in Ming alchemy texts were natural phenomena or symbolic representations of key energy flowing through objects. You figure if you squint, anything can look like ki. Still, the bead is compelling. It's not gold, not precious, but it feels significant. You set it aside, scribble a note to present it as a spirit conductor bead, and reach for the next recipe scroll. This one is labeled simply Immortal Flame Mixture. In small print, do not attempt indoors. Of course you're going to attempt it indoors. You assemble the ingredients: pine resin, powdered oyster shell, red clay from a local shrine, and a sealed phial of something ominously labeled Night Wind. You're not entirely sure what that is. Maybe it's just fermented plum alcohol, but it smells like regret and rotten socks. You heat the base mixture slowly. The texture thickens into a sludge. You add drops of the liquid. Immediately, the air changes, not just scent vibration. The walls seem to inhale. Your hair lifts slightly. Like a storm is coming, you take a step back. Then thwomp, a bright blue flame leaps from the crucible. You panic, grab the lid, and slam it shut. The room plunges into smoky quiet. Your heart races. You cough, wave away the smoke, and peer at the sealed container. It's shaking. Slightly. Not good. You carefully lift the lid just a crack. A soft, warm glow greets you. Inside is a bead, still forming, glowing faintly blue like moonlight on metal. You don't touch it. Not yet. You just stare. You've made something strange and possibly dangerous, but undeniably beautiful. You let it cool, pack it in ash, and mark it as Bead 6 Lunar Core Alloy. That night, you crawl into bed, your clothes reeking of smoke and success. You don't dream, or if you do, you don't remember. But you wake up with an idea. What if you tried integrating magnetic ore into the next batch, a heaven-attracting metal? The noblemen would love that. You scribble it down before you forget. Just 2 words: stone that pulls. Then you reach for a rice ball. You remember to eat. For once. Progress. The next morning begins with a surprise. A bird, an actual living one, has flown into your workshop and is now perched on the edge of your scroll shelf, pecking at a dried lotus petal. You stare at it, half expecting it to speak. It doesn't, of course. Just flaps once and drops a small, full, round object onto your notes. It's a peach pit. You sigh. Is this a sign? A warning, a snack? Hard to say, but it does remind you of something, a passage you read ages ago, tucked deep inside the pureposes, a classic of Taoist alchemy by Ge Hong. He mentioned peachwood as a conduit of spiritual energy, especially when charred and used in purification. It wards off evil, anchors the soul, and supposedly attracts celestial essence. You never gave it much thought, but now, with half your beads delivered and the deadline tightening around your neck like a damp rag, it feels worth trying. You grind the peach pit. It's harder than expected. And halfway through, your hand cramps. But the powder you get is fragrant, almost floral. You add it to a mixture of bronze shavings and powdered jade scrap leftovers from an old merchant who owed you and never paid in coin. This batch will be bead 7, the soul ward. You work carefully, layering materials like a painter with too much time and too few brushes. The result is something matte, green-gray, and almost alive-looking. You bury it in salt to dry. While it rests, you allow yourself a few moments of calm. You step outside. The alley smells of rain, though the sky's clear. Laundry flaps overhead. Somewhere, a flute plays lazy, wandering notes that remind you of afternoons before alchemy consumed your life. You close your eyes, letting the music sink into your skin. Then you hear footsteps. You open your eyes just in time to see a young scholar rounding the corner. He wears ink-stained robes and carries a stack of scrolls strapped with red twine. He stops when he sees you, tilts his head. "You're the alchemist, aren't you?" You don't answer. "Not yet. I heard you made something unusual," he adds. "Something that hums." You nod cautiously. Word travels faster than fire. He doesn't push, just reaches into his sleeve and hands you a folded piece of parchment. "I copied this from a scroll in the Henlin archives," he says. "Thought you might find it interesting." He vanishes before you can say thanks. Back inside, you unfold the parchment. It's a diagram, circular, geometric, labeled in 2 different scripts. You recognize one early Tang. The other is more obscure, possibly Khitan. The central figure is a 5-layered circle, like an alchemical onion, with characters that translate roughly to metal reborn in the blood of stars. You laugh, a little nervously, because just last week, you joked to yourself about making star blood. And now here's a centuries-old scroll saying the same thing. Coincidence? Maybe. Historians still argue whether scrolls like this were legitimate ancient knowledge or later fabrications designed to impress superstitious nobles. But either way, this one sparked something in you. You decide to try recreating the diagram, not the image itself, but the structure. You gather 5 metals: copper, tin, lead, iron, and the faint residue of silver dust you've been hoarding. You arrange them in a circle, each on a petal of a carved wooden lotus. In the center, you place the peachwood bead. Then you light 5 candles, each with a different oil: rose, camphor, citrus, sandalwood, and mugwort. The scent is overwhelming. Your head swims. You chant, mostly out of habit, words you half remember from your old Taoist training. Nothing elaborate, just enough to center yourself. Then you wait. Nothing happens for 10 minutes. You start wondering if maybe you've wasted half a day on nonsense. But then, the bead pulses. Just once. A soft glow. Faint, but unmistakable. You scramble to document the reaction. You don't understand it, but it means you've struck something. A resonance, a layering, or maybe just the right cocktail of elements and intention. You store the bead carefully, labeling it Harmony Core. 7 down. You're getting close. That night, you lie awake longer than usual. Not from fear, but anticipation. You've hit a rhythm now. Your body aches. Your fingers are stained with soot. Your lungs probably resemble the inside of an incense burner, but your mind is on fire. In the dim light, you imagine the nobleman's face when he sees this bead. Not gold, not silver, but something new. Maybe that's the point. Not immortality, not wealth, just something new. The next morning begins with a surprise. A bird, an actual living one, has flown into your workshop and is now perched on the edge of your scroll shelf, pecking at a dried lotus petal. You stare at it, half expecting it to speak. It doesn't, of course, just flaps once and drops a small, round object onto your notes. It's a peach pit. You sigh. Is this a sign, a warning, a snack? Hard to say, but it does remind you of something, a passage you read ages ago, tucked deep inside the pureposes, a classic of Taoist alchemy by Ge Hong. He mentioned peachwood as a conduit of spiritual energy, especially when charred and used in purification. It wards off evil, anchors the soul, and supposedly attracts celestial essence. You never gave it much thought. But now, with half your beads delivered and the deadline tightening around your neck like a damp rag, it feels worth trying. You grind the peach pit. It's harder than expected. And halfway through, your hand cramps, but the powder you get is fragrant, almost floral. You add it to a mixture of bronze shavings and powdered jade scrap leftovers from an old merchant who owed you and never paid in coin. This batch will be bead 7, the Soul Ward. You work carefully, layering materials like a painter with too much time and too few brushes. The result is something matte, green-gray, and almost alive-looking. You bury it in salt to dry. While it rests, you allow yourself a few moments of calm. You step outside. The alley smells of rain, though the sky is clear. Laundry flaps overhead. Somewhere, a flute plays lazy, wandering notes that remind you of afternoons before alchemy consumed your life. You close your eyes, letting the music sink into your skin. Then you hear footsteps. You open your eyes just in time to see a young scholar rounding the corner. He wears ink-stained robes and carries a stack of scrolls strapped with red twine. He stops when he sees you, tilts his head. You're the alchemist, aren't you? You don't answer. Not yet. I heard you made something unusual, he adds. Something that hums. You nod cautiously. Word travels faster than fire. He doesn't push, just reaches into his sleeve and hands you a folded piece of parchment. I copied this from a scroll in the Hanlin archives. He says, thought you might find it interesting. He vanishes before you can say thanks. Back inside, you unfold the parchment. It's a diagram, circular, geometric, labeled in 2 different scripts. You recognize one early Tang. The other is more obscure, possibly Khitan. The central figure is a 5-layered circle, like an alchemical onion, with characters that translate roughly to metal reborn in the blood of stars. You laugh, a little nervously, because just last week you joked to yourself about making star blood, and now here's a centuries-old scroll saying the same thing. Coincidence? Maybe. Historians still argue whether scrolls like this were legitimate ancient knowledge or later fabrications designed to impress superstitious nobles. But either way, this one sparked something in you. You decide to try recreating the diagram, not the image itself, but the structure. You gather 5 metals: copper, tin, lead, iron, and the faint residue of silver dust you've been hoarding. You arrange them in a circle, each on a petal of a carved wooden lotus. In the center, you place the peachwood bead. Then you light 5 candles, each with a different oil: rose, camphor, citrus, sandalwood, and mugwort. The scent is overwhelming. Your head swims. You chant, mostly out of habit, words you half remember from your old Taoist training. Nothing elaborate, just enough to center yourself. Then you wait. Nothing happens for 10 minutes. You start wondering if maybe you've wasted half a day on nonsense. But then, the bead pulses. Just once. A soft glow, faint, but unmistakable. You scramble to document the reaction. You don't understand it, but it means you've struck something. A resonance, a layering, or maybe just the right cocktail of elements and intention. You store the bead carefully, labeling it Harmony Core. 7 down. You're getting close. That night, you lie awake longer than usual. Not from fear, but anticipation. You've hit a rhythm now. Your body aches. Your fingers are stained with soot. Your lungs probably resemble the inside of an incense burner, but your mind is on fire. In the dim light, you imagine the nobleman's face when he sees this bead. Not gold, not silver, but something new. Maybe that's the point. Not immortality, not wealth, just something new. You wake up to find your neighbor pounding on your door with a shoe. Your furnace, he growls, is keeping my mother-in-law awake. She's threatening to hex your ancestors. You apologize with half a rice cake and promise to muffle the bellows. As soon as he leaves, you get back to it. Bead number 8. You're going for spectacle now, something eye-catching. You've made beads that hum, that shimmer, that smell like a Taoist's wardrobe. But what about motion, something kinetic, alive, Not literally, you're not that reckless. But maybe something that reacts to touch or temperature. You pull out a sealed jar labeled dragon salt. It's not really from a dragon. It's a blend of volcanic minerals and saltpeter. Supposedly reactive, definitely corrosive. You open it very carefully. To this, you add mica flakes, pine soot, and magnetite dust, what some fringe texts call lodestone spirit. It's the ancient world's version of playing with magnets. Taoist alchemists believed magnetite guided qi and could help the soul navigate spiritual currents. Modern scholars roll their eyes. But hey, those guys never tried melting it in a crucible with beetle resin. You mix slowly, noting the glittery sheen. It sparkles like powdered jade, which you take as a good omen, or at least a sign you won't go blind this time. You pour the mixture into a hollow bead mold, one you carved yourself from aged bamboo. The interior is smooth, but lined with a spiral groove, designed to trap fine particles in a swirl pattern. A long shot, but if it works, it might create an illusion of movement when turned. You seal it and place it in the ash oven. Not a full fire this time, just a slow, steady bake. While it cooks, you decide to visit your supplier. His name's Chow. He lives 2 alleys over and claims to have once served tea to a visiting Mongol prince. He also claims to have mercury that doesn't bite and copper wire that sings. You take his words with a ladle of salt. Today, you ask for 2 things, cinnabar powder and green clay. He raises an eyebrow, making a gaudy jokes. Maybe, you say, deadpan. He grins, hands you a paper-wrapped bundle, and charges double. Back at your workshop, the mold has cooled. You pry it open slowly and gasp. Inside is a dark, gleaming bead with a faint spiral of glitter winding around its surface. When you tilt it, the spiral shifts ever so slightly, as if swimming in the material. It's mesmerizing. You test its magnetism by placing it next to your iron tool. It nudges forward, just a hair, but enough. You dub it Sky Compass. The nobleman will eat it up. Historians still argue whether Ming alchemists actually understood magnetism as a force, or whether they saw it purely in spiritual terms, kui, attraction, fate alignment, that sort of thing. But you think it's both. After all, the earth moves you. Why shouldn't a bead? As you polish the Sky Compass, you hear shouting outside. A group of scholars is gathered near the canal bridge. Apparently, a local examiner claimed to have discovered a formula for turning rice husks into silver. The crowd is skeptical but eager. You resist the urge to laugh. You've tried that recipe. Twice. All you got was smoky rice and silver-colored disappointment. Still, you wander over to listen. The examiner is waving a scroll and gesturing wildly. You catch bits of his rant confiscated by the gods. Can't suppress truth forever. Alchemy is the people's science. You decide to leave before you're recognized. One accidental explosion near a public bathhouse, and suddenly you're that guy for life. Back at home, you lock the Sky Compass bead in your lacquered box, alongside the Soul Ward and Lunar Core. 8 done. You sit down, breathing slow, soot-smudged fingers trembling just slightly. You think of the Imperial Court, of the workshops under the Forbidden City, of the elite alchemists with gold-threaded robes and stone-tiled labs. They get patrons, funding, test subjects. You get a leaky roof and your neighbor's hex-happy mother-in-law. Still, they're chasing immortality. And you're chasing magic. Not sleight of hand, not illusion, but the small, undeniable magic that happens when heat, timing, and intention line up, when the materials whisper instead of scream. You reach for your notebook. You jot down today's measurements, then add a doodle of the spiral bead. You draw tiny arrows around it. Underneath, you write, movement, its own life. Maybe, just maybe, you go to bed early that night. Your fingers ache, your eyes are grainy. but your dreams are full of glowing spirals that spin forever. You wake before dawn, not because you want to, but because the street cat has found its way inside again and is sitting on your face. You peel it off gently, mutter a few curses under your breath, and take it as a sign it's going to be a long day. You've entered the final stretch, beads 9 and 10, and your ideas are starting to run dangerously thin. Not for lack of inspiration, but because the things you really want to try, they're illegal, unstable, or according to your old teacher, a shortcut to turning your lungs into fish food. But there's one recipe you've never quite dared to attempt. The resonance bead. You found the instructions years ago in the torn corner of a Song Dynasty scroll used to wrap fish. Half burned, half faded, but legible enough. It described a process of embedding frequencies. Yes, sounds into metallic compounds through vibration and infusion. The scroll was vague, possibly fraudulent, or maybe ahead of its time. Historians still argue whether Ming alchemists even understood sound in a scientific sense. Some believe they merely copied Buddhist tonal theories, while others insist that a few truly experimented with audible harmonics in metal. Either way, the idea fascinates you. You start by gathering materials with resonance potential, a small brass chime, which you steal from your own doorframe, slivers of hardened bamboo, known for their natural vibration when struck, and a tiny pinch of mother-of-pearl dust, a luxury you've hoarded for years. It adds shimmer and complexity, at least in your theory. Possibly just looks pretty, hard to test. You set the bamboo strips inside your mortarium and tap them rhythmically with a lacquered mallet. The resulting powder smells faintly of incense and memories. Then comes the fun part. You play the chime, again and again. Its tone is clear, almost shrill. You record its pitch using an old device that measures echo delay in a clay jar. Yes, it's imprecise, but it's all you've got. You heat the brass powder and bamboo mix in a crucible while humming the same note, over and over. This is probably nonsense, but you feel something click, not in your ears, but in your chest. A kind of inner hum. The metal seems to move differently, flow better. You pour it into a mold shaped like a droplet. No frills, simple, elegant. You place the mold beside your bed and leave it to set overnight. You dream that night, vividly. You're in a forest, and everything is humming. The trees, the ground, even the wind has tone. And you carry something warm in your pocket, something pulsing faintly. You wake up before the sun and check the mold. The bead is warm. Still, you hold it to your ear, and you swear this is true. It hums, not loudly, not even constantly, just a faint vibration when touched, like a tuning fork that never stops singing. Your first instinct is to panic. Did you finally crack some forbidden technique? Are you about to explode? But then you smile, because for the first time, it feels like the bead is speaking back. You call it the echo seed. You log the steps carefully down to the number of chime strikes and wrap it in silk for delivery. 9 done, 1 to go. And for number 10, you want to break the rules. You want to make something symbolic, not useful, not impressive, but true. You call it the ash bead. You sweep the floor of your workshop, collecting the fragments of all previous experiments. Dust, shavings, broken shards, failed attempts, a fragment of the parchment from the resonance scroll, even a single hair yours from a particularly stressful afternoon. You mix all of it with powdered charcoal, resin, and a drop of your own blood. Not out of ritual, just to say I was here. You fire it slowly, carefully, a low heat that hardens but doesn't erase. When it's done, the bead is plain, dark gray, uneven, ugly, by most standards. But you look at it and feel something settle in your chest. Completion. You pack the beads, 10 in total, into a lacquered box lined with red cloth. You include a note. Each bead contains a question, not an answer. Wear them in silence and listen for the echo. You don't sign it. You don't need to. The nobleman's servant arrives that afternoon. He bows, takes the box, and leaves without a word. You watch him go. Then, for the first time in months, you clean your table. Not to work, just to sit. Outside, the sky turns orange with dusk. The street cat returns and curls on your lap. And you wonder, will they understand? Maybe not. But you do. You sleep for an entire day after the delivery. When you finally wake up, you feel hollow. Not in a tragic, world-weary way, just empty. Like a crucible after the pour. 10 beads. Dozens of burns. Weeks without proper sleep. And now, quiet. You sweep the ashes out of your furnace with a kind of reverence. There's something sacred in this stillness. No deadlines, no formulas, no nobleman breathing down your neck through his minions. Then the knocking starts again. It's not your neighbor this time. It's a tall man in plum-colored robes. His boots are clean. His face is unreadable. You don't recognize the insignia. But it's official, government, military, something worse. You brace yourself. He speaks softly. The beads arrived. Pause. They were unexpected. You nod, trying not to flinch. He continues, "My lord was especially interested in the final bead, the gray one. What was its purpose? You consider lying, saying it was just filler, decorative, an accident. But then you shrug and tell the truth. It's everything that didn't work." He stares for a long moment. Then, to your surprise, he smiles, just slightly. That's the one he wears most often. And then he leaves. You sit in silence for a while after that. Your fingers twitch, reaching for tools that aren't needed. Your ears strain for the sound of bubbling mixtures. Nothing. Just the hum of wind through the paper screen. But something lingers in you, a buzz. Not anxiety, something quieter. Curiosity. And you realize this wasn't the end. Not really. Historians still argue whether individual alchemists ever achieved independent breakthroughs, or whether all so-called discoveries were just rehashes of older, forgotten work. But they rarely talk about the aftermath, the moment when creation ends and reflection begins. You walk through the city, for the first time in weeks without smoke in your clothes. The market smells overwhelming. Sweets, oils, sweat. A man is selling fortune sticks. Another is painting poetry on kites. Life doesn't seem to care whether you've touched the edge of truth or merely singed your eyebrows chasing it. And somehow, that feels fair. You buy a sesame cake and eat it slowly, staring at the river. Boats glide by. You see a young boy dragging a floating lantern with a string. You see an old woman muttering to a stone frog. You see a man hawking real philosopher's stones made from dyed beans. You chuckle. Back at your workshop, you tidy your shelves, not obsessively, just enough to reclaim space. Then you see it. The diagram, the Khitan Tang fusion scroll the scholar gave you. You'd nearly forgotten it. You take it out, spread it across the table, and trace the central sigil with your finger. There's something unfinished about it, as though the diagram invites continuation. You flip it over, and there, tucked into the fibers, a faint watermark. A shape you've seen before, on the back of a monk's robe. It's not a design, it's a map. Your heart skips. Not a map of land, but of relationships, elements, phases, alchemical interactions. You recognize the layout fire above metal, water flanking earth, a sequence, a pathway. Could it be a recipe or a trap? You gather paper, ink, and begin to copy it slowly, carefully. You mark what you know. You circle what you don't. You highlight a section labeled Heaven's Breath. It could mean mercury vapor, or celestial timing, or literal breath. Scholars still argue over the term. And then you notice a single character off to the side. You accumulate, condense. You stare at it for a long time. You flip to your notebook and find the old recipe for the echo seed. You compare the steps. Something aligns. Not perfectly, but uncannily. Like two stanzas of a half-remembered poem. You whisper aloud. Maybe the echo seed wasn't the end. Maybe it was step one. The idea hits like lightning wrapped in silk. Gentle, but electric. You gather materials again, not to make a new bead, but to test, to reframe everything. You boil pine soot, not for pigment, but for its chemical decay. You melt silver next to iron, not for contrast, but to listen to the way they resist each other. You're not working toward a product now. You're chasing a reaction, a conversation, something deeper than immortality, more fragile than gold, something that feels honest. And as you scrawl new notes, some elegant, some complete gibberish, you feel your fingers steady again. Your shoulders relax. Your heart doesn't race, but it hums. Whatever you've made, whatever you've survived, it wasn't in vain. You're no longer the desperate alchemist clawing for coin or prestige. You're just a question with hands, and that's more than enough. You forget to eat, not because you're fasting or poor or practicing some ascetic monk discipline. You just forget. Time folds differently when you're back in it. When you're tinkering, scratching ideas on parchment, boiling water you never drink. A day becomes a blur, and somehow that's comforting. The new scroll, the fusion of Khitan and Tang alchemical theory, is becoming an obsession. You've pinned it to your wall, each section marked with colored twine, annotations, and at least 3 accidental sesame oil stains. It's messy, but it's alive. It starts with heaven's breath, which you've half decided is a metaphor for vaporized mercury. Dangerous, of course, but you've handled worse. Remember that time you dropped orpiment onto live charcoal? You almost invented Ming fireworks. Anyway, you're not trying to make something pretty this time. You're trying to make something understandable. A bead was a vessel. Now you want a reaction that speaks on its own, one you don't have to interpret, or embellish, or disguise. The concept is simple. Can 2 elements that hate each other still create harmony if introduced the right way? To test it, you begin with copper filings and crushed jade. These are famously incompatible in traditional Chinese metallurgy. One conducts, one resists, one melts easily, one shatters under heat. You're practically asking for a disaster. But you remember an obscure Tang-era theory, a kind of chemical matchmaking. They believed that incompatible substances could be tricked into working together through something called elemental buffering. Modern historians debate if it was just fancy superstition. But you've always found value in superstition. At the very least, it gives you something to blame. So you try it. You combine the copper and jade with a tiny droplet of ox bile. Yes, ox bile. It's bitter. It smells like a dying god. And it was once considered a living solvent. Supposedly it binds. You stir it in slowly. Then, a final twist you hum, not for magic, but because you believe sound matters. It did for the echo seed, after all. You heat the mixture gently, expecting smoke. But instead, the jade doesn't explode. The copper doesn't boil. They meld. Sort of. They fuse around the edges, forming a cloudy, swirling paste. It moves like molten silver, but with a faint green shimmer. You're stunned. You haven't seen this before. Not in the scrolls, not in your dreams. It's not what you expected. You let it cool into a soft disc and carve a single line through it with a bone stylus. The disc responds. The groove doesn't stay still, it subtly shifts, deepening and moving, as if reacting to the air around it. It's alive. Not biologically, of course, but chemically, it's still reacting. You stare. You write down every detail: color, texture, behavior. You poke it twice and jump when it wobbles back. You drop it in water. It hisses. It doesn't dissolve. You've made something new. And in the world of Ming alchemy, that's both a blessing and a risk. Because if you can do it, maybe others can too. Or maybe someone will say you shouldn't have. Historians still debate how independent inventors in the Ming era were treated when their discoveries outshone those of court-sponsored alchemists. Some argue they were welcomed, documented, even rewarded. Others whisper darker endings, disappearances, forced apprenticeships, silent erasures. You decide not to tell anyone. For now, instead, you create 2 more discs. One cracks, the other melts into your floorboards. Progress. By the 4th attempt, you realize the real trick isn't in the copper or the jade. It's in the timing. The moment you introduce the ox bile changes everything. Too early, and it curdles. Too late, and it never binds. You need a beat, a rhythm. So you try again with music. You set a chime to swing over the mixture, hitting at exact intervals. You mix with a tempo, not too fast, not too slow. And when it settles, the result is a disc that resonates without touch. It vibrates subtly in response to the chime's note. It's like a tuning plate, a sound catcher. You don't name it yet. You just sit there, listening, watching. It feels like something you're not supposed to have. Not because it's illegal, but because it's beautiful. You laugh quietly. You haven't made gold. You haven't cured death. But you've made something that reacts to the world, that sings when no one else does. You sleep that night with the disc under your pillow and dream of bells underwater. You wake to a knock, not a polite tap either. A rhythmic, purposeful knock, 3 short raps. 2 long, then 1 slow thud that sounds like someone pounding the door with a bag of bricks. You don't move at first. You listen. Could just be your neighbor's toddler with a pot again, or a ghost. You've lived alone long enough to find either plausible, but then the knock repeats same pattern, perfectly timed, like a signal. You open the door. A woman stands there, in scholar's robes, mid-30s, confident, holding a scroll like a sword. Her eyes scan you like you're a suspect, or a puzzle, or both. You're the one who made the jade copper disc. Your mouth opens, closes. You didn't tell anyone. You haven't even named the thing. How does she know? Relax, she says. I'm not here to arrest you. You relax exactly 0%. She steps in without waiting and lays her scroll on your table, brushing aside half a bowl of pickled radish and a cracked ink stone. The scroll unfurls fast. Inside sketches, diagrams, data, and at the center, your disc. Or at least something very much like it, only bigger, thinner, refined. You look up at her, stunned. It's part of a resonance sequence, she says. A tuning lattice. We've been trying to reproduce it for years, but never found a stable bind. You blink. We, the Imperial Acoustic Registry, she says, as if that explains anything. We study vibrational reactions, not the mystical kind, real ones. Sound, frequency, resonance behavior. It started as an entertainment project for the opera houses, but it's grown. You can't decide if you're flattered or terrified? Probably both. She continues, tapping her scroll. Yours is the closest we've seen to stable dynamic resonance outside of the capital. You frown. I didn't even know such a thing existed. Most people don't. She says it's deliberately obscured. But when your disc reacted to a specific performance in Nanjing, we got a ping. You laugh. You mean... It sang back. She nods. You sit down. And then she asks the question you've been dreading and craving in equal measure. Will you show me how you made it? Historians still argue whether Ming alchemists shared knowledge freely or hoarded it out of fear, secrecy, or pride. The truth is likely both. After all, there were no patents, no protections. You taught someone else your method, and a month later it could be theirs. Their glory, your ruin. But you look at her. You think about your disc, how it moved, how it hummed like it wanted to be heard, and you nod. You show her everything copper filing method, the ox biles timing, the bone stylus incision. She takes notes, but mostly she listens. She really listens, like she's trying to hear the chemistry in your voice. Then she unrolls another scroll. Inside a city-sized blueprint. You squint. It's a dome, huge, layered with concentric rings. Symbols from the Khitan scroll. Dozens of tuning discs embedded into the walls. A kind of musical observatory. We're building this, she says, in secret. Outside Hangzhou, it's called the Wind Chamber. You blink. She says, it will amplify resonance patterns in sound-reactive materials. Like your disc. It's not for war, not for wealth. It's to understand. You sit back. You've spent years chasing alchemy as survival. Now someone wants to make it sing. You tell her you'll come. She nods. And just like that, the trajectory of your life shifts. That night, you pack what you need. Your notes, your tools. A half-rotted pear you forgot about but are weirdly sentimental toward. The disc, of course, stays with you wrapped in silk. And just as you're about to leave, you take one last look around your old workshop. The burn mark from the failed sulfur bead. The crooked shelf with the useful lies journal. The notch on the door from when you panicked at a thunderclap and flung a jar of vinegar into the wall. It all feels small now, but meaningful. You whisper a quiet goodbye and step into the future, one humming tone at a time. The journey to Hangzhou takes 7 days. 7 days of carts that rattle like haunted maracas. Inns with beds made from compressed despair, and meals that taste like boiled socks. But you don't complain. Not once, because you're going to the Wind Chamber. You and the scholar, her name is Lian. By the way, don't talk much the first 2 days. She's focused, always scribbling, calculating, muttering to herself in frequencies. Literally, too sharp. 412 cycles. You pretend to understand, but honestly, you just nod and smile like a duck who wandered into an exam hall. On day 3, she shows you a prototype. It's like your disc, but thinner, lighter, and it whispers when moved. Not sings, not chimes, whispers, like it's exchanging secrets with the air. You're blown away, and slightly offended, but mostly fascinated. You ask how she did it. She shrugs. Your disc was stable. I just added feedback channels. You both smile. A rare moment of real connection. By day 5, you've bonded over the shared trauma of mercury exposure, and on day 6, you help her fix a tuning scroll that got crumpled in the rain. She jokes that you're finally useful. You respond by pretending to drop her precious whisper disc. She nearly throws you off the cart. Then, on the morning of the 7th day, you see it, the Wind Chamber. It sits just outside Hangzhou, tucked between 2 hills like a secret folded into a story. From afar, it looks like a giant lotus bud, made of lacquered wood and bronze struts. But as you approach, you see the complexity. Hundreds of small vents line the structure, not windows resonators. Tuned openings that catch the wind and translate it into vibrations. The building breathes. You can hear it from the road, a low, continuous tone, like the earth is humming a lullaby. You step inside. It's colder than you expect. Not because of temperature, but because of presence. Like the room is aware of you. It doesn't echo. It absorbs. And everywhere, discs, mounted on pillars. suspended on wires. Some spinning slowly, some still, all of them reacting subtly to your movements. One hums when you walk past, another chimes when you cough. You hold your breath, just to see if silence changes anything. It does. Lian is watching your face the whole time. "This is just the first chamber," she says. "We're building 9. You nod slowly. "What are they for?" She hesitates. "Then we're trying to map the elemental harmony. The real one. Not the whooshing you read in scrolls, but how elements actually interact across disciplines, alchemy, acoustics, vibration, spirit." You raise an eyebrow. "Spirit." She waves it off. "Metaphor. Probably. Historians still argue whether late Ming experimentation veered into mysticism out of desperation or genuine curiosity. But in this place, it feels less like heresy and more like clarity." You place your original disc onto one of the test pedestals. It hums immediately. Not a flat hum, but layered like a harmony building from deep within. It reacts to the room, to Lian, to you. The bone-carved line in the center pulses faintly, syncing with a chime swinging 10 feet away. And then something strange happens. Another disc, one of hers, responds. It sings back, not identical. A complement. The two sounds merge, canceling out certain waves, amplifying others. The tone shifts from curious to complete. You both freeze. "It's communicating," she whispers. You don't respond. You're too busy crying. You're not sure why. Maybe it's the stress, the exhaustion, the ridiculous, unbearable beauty of it, of a reaction that finally feels like recognition. Not wealth, not survival, harmony. Over the next few days, you run more tests. Your disc pairs with 2 others, then 5, then 8. Each resonance creates a slightly different effect. One alters temperature, another affects moisture. One even dims the torchlight when played a certain way. You become obsessed with these pairings. You and Lian create a board marking which discs harmonize, which reject, which fall silent. One day, a disc shatters when placed next to another. You both step back in awe. Incompatible. You whisper. Lian nods, but honest. That becomes your mantra. You develop a new theory. Every substance has a resonant truth, a frequency it sings when placed under pressure. Some truths pair well, others repel. The goal of alchemy wasn't transmutation, it was conversation. You write it on the chamber wall and laugh when Lian underlines it with red ink and adds, "peer-reviewed." It feels like a rebirth. You're not just an alchemist now. You're a listener, and for the first time in your life, the world seems willing to talk back. You start waking up before dawn. Not because someone knocks, not because of nightmares or illness. You just want to, you need to. There's something about the wind chamber at sunrise that feels sacred. The way the early mist drifts through the resonator vents. The way the chimes move before the wind even arrives. Like they sense it coming. You sit alone in the dome's center. No tools, no notes, just silence. And your disc, it lies on a silk cloth, still vibrating gently though no one's touched it for hours. You begin calling it the listening stone, a bit dramatic, sure, but the name fits. It never stops listening, or speaking, or doing that mysterious third thing, whatever happens when you're not watching. Lian joins you sometimes. She's quieter now. 2, less the hard-edged scholar, more the patient composer. You've caught her singing softly into one of the tuning shells, just to see how it responds. She won't admit it, but she's made peace with wonder. Together, you start testing the outer chambers. Each one is tuned to a different principle. Heat, moisture, motion, even silence. The one tuned to silence is the strangest. Inside it, even your heartbeat sounds like thunder. And yet, The discs whisper more clearly than anywhere else. Historians still argue whether Ming alchemists understood sound as energy or metaphor. But you're convinced they knew. Maybe not scientifically, but intuitively. They didn't write it in formulas, they encoded it in rituals, chants, drum patterns. You and Lian decode an ancient ritual rhythm found in a cracked zither manual. You replicate it using suspended bronze strings and a dripping water clock. Something responds. A disc from the southern ring begins pulsing faintly like a heartbeat trying to sync. You write that down, and for once, you feel the rhythm more than you understand it. That becomes the rule, now less calculation, more listening. You start designing experiments just by feeling which discs want to sit near each other. You arrange them like guests at a delicate banquet. No rivalries, no tension, just potential. One evening, you fall asleep inside Chamber 4, the one that responds to motion. You wake to find every disc around you vibrating in unison, not loudly, but clearly, as if they had a conversation while you dozed off. You scribble down, sleep enhances synchronization. Lian laughs when she reads it. Or maybe you just snore in key. You both need the humor. Because something else is happening now. Strange visitors begin arriving. First, a court official dressed in gold-trimmed robes, fanning himself like he owns the air. He watches the experiments with vague interest, then asks Lian, could this be turned toward warfare? You both lie. Instantly. Oh no, Lian says, too unstable. Not practical. You nod along, pretending to yawn. Very delicate. Breaks if you breathe too hard. He leaves unimpressed. Then come the musicians. A blind erhu player who asks if the discs can accompany her. A troupe of dancers who want to perform inside the resonance. One poet insists on reciting love verses into the moisture-tuned chamber. His voice makes one disc melt. You don't stop him, but the strangest visitor is the boy, no older than 10. Quiet. Walks with his hands clasped like a monk. He doesn't say a word the whole time he's there, until he sees your disc. He walks right up to it and says, simply, this one knows my name. You and Lian exchange a look. Then he hums, and the disc responds, not just vibration, not just resonance. The carved line in the center glows faintly. The sound it produces is soft, round, and deeply familiar, like a memory of someone who loved you once. But you forgot their face. The boy leaves without another word. You try to recreate the hum, you fail. You try to track the boy. No luck. You're left with the unsettling idea that maybe the disc did know him, or maybe it was waiting for someone like him all along. That night, you can't sleep. You walk the perimeter of the wind chamber, listening to the discs sing in their half-silence. Some harmonize, others hiss. One produces a sound like laughter and refuses to stop. And you wonder, did you discover something? Or did you awaken something you don't know exactly when the letters start coming? At first, they're scribbled requests, messages sent through couriers, often misaddressed or half-wrecked by rain. Dear Master of Harmonic Copper. One begins. Please advise on a plague vibration I read of in old scrolls. Another one is folded into the shape of a goose. Inside my neighbor's drums made my pig give birth early. Is this sorcery? You laugh at that one. But then come the more serious inquiries from scholars, healers, even monks. People curious about what you're doing, what the discs are, and whether it's true that one of them sings back when you whisper your regrets into it. You write no replies, not because you're rude. You just can't yet explain, not properly. And besides, the work has become more intense. Lian thinks she's found a frequency that causes salt to crystallize mid-air. You test it with disbelief and watch. Jaws slack as tiny. Feather-light flakes form between tuning forks and hover for nearly a full second before dropping. It's beautiful, terrifying, humbling. You don't record it. Some things don't want to be trapped on scrolls. Later that week, one of the outer chambers collapses, not physically resonantly. You're working in the motion chamber when it happens. Suddenly, every disc begins to hum wrong, off-key, like they're mimicking the real tone, but with malice. Then the air changes. It compresses, your ears pop. You taste iron. Lian yanks you out just in time, slamming the bamboo doors behind you. From inside, you still hear it, the grotesque, lopsided hum, like a dying animal imitating music. You don't speak for a long time. When the vibration finally fades, you sneak back in. The chamber is different now. No damage, no burn marks. But the discs, they're cracked, warped, unresponsive, dead. You bury them, literally, in the soil beneath a camphor tree, as if they were old friends. I think we reached something we weren't ready for, Lian murmurs. You agree, but the fear stays with you, even as you keep working. Historians still argue whether Ming experimentation ended because of internal decay, or because the alchemists finally hit a wall, a spiritual, physical, or ethical limit they chose not to cross. You now suspect it was all three. Still, you press on because that's what alchemists do. You gather what's left and build new pairings, gentler this time. Nothing over 5 harmonics. No more aggressive spirals, as Lian calls them. You write that on the wall. To respect the spiral. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolls in. You decide to let the discs play with it. You leave the chamber doors wide open. The wind rushes in like a child let loose in a toy shop. Every vent catches a different note. Every disc reacts, sings, shudders, sometimes whistles. The entire wind chamber becomes a symphony. You lie on the floor and laugh like a madman. Lian stands over you, soaked from rain, grinning. If someone asks me what this place is, I'm going to say it's a playground for vibrations. You tell her that's the best definition anyone's offered, but even joy gets interrupted. A messenger arrives one morning, riding hard from the capital. Not a lowly courier, this one has an official seal, red lacquer, and inside the message, a summons. Your name, Lian's name, a formal invitation to appear before the Emperor's Grand Scholar Board. You reread it 3 times. Then you reread the last line, for formal inspection and assessment of the acoustic alchemical structures under your purview. Lian reads it over your shoulder. She sighs. Well, she says, we had a good run. You don't speak, because deep down, you knew it was coming. You've danced too long in the dark without someone noticing the glow. The next morning, you pack, but this time it's different. You hide your real notes. You leave decoy sketches impressive but broken formulas, just convincing enough to distract her. Lian does the same. You call it strategic forgetfulness, because the truth is you don't want them to understand everything. Not yet. The discs still speak, but now they whisper cautiously, and you begin to wonder what harmony looks like. In exile, the palace summons you in late autumn. The journey back to the capital feels longer than the one to Hangzhou, not because of the miles, but because of the weight. Each clatter of the cart's wheels echoes like a countdown. You and Lian speak little. The quiet isn't strained, it's tactical, like breath held before a plunge. The Grand Scholar Board is housed in a curved roof hall just behind the Imperial Library. The building is cold, not in temperature, but in temperament. Even the wood here smells official. You sit on a woven mat in front of a semicircle of men, 12 of them, all old, some ancient, robes pressed flat as calligraphy paper, beards like punctuation marks. They ask about your experiments. You tell them what they want to hear. Discs, yes. Harmonics, yes. Application undecided. You emphasize its fragility. You mention instability. You casually throw in a story about a prototype exploding which never happened. but feels true enough. Lian nods along, playing the distracted assistant, but one scholar number 6 from the left presses harder. What is the purpose of the chambers? You shrug to observe vibrational response in metallic lattices, and the disc that sings prototype, highly temperamental. He squints, and the spiral notes etched on your wall. You pause, then smile softly. Art. They do not laugh. They release you hours later with no decision, just a warning. Any further work must be submitted for inspection. Back in the guest quarters, Lian paces. We're being watched now. We'll have to dismantle at least 2 chambers, maybe 3. You nod, but that night, as she sleeps, you make a choice. You return to the wind chamber alone. You take the listening stone, wrap it in silk, hide it beneath your robe. You walk the perimeter one last time. The discs know. They hum in farewell, not desperate, but accepting, like wind brushing bamboo. You place your hand on the camphor tree, whisper thanks to the buried failures beneath. Then you burn it all. Not in rage, not in fear, in love. Slow, controlled fire, chamber by chamber. Resonator vents melt like bronze tears. Chimes warp mid-note. Your scrolls curl inward like flowers, closing at dusk. Historians still argue whether the wind chamber ever truly existed, or if it was a metaphorical structure, one of those poetic allegories that alchemists favored. A parable about resonance and resistance. Let them argue. You vanish into the southern provinces. Take a new name. Hide the listening stone in a lacquer box beneath floorboards. Occasionally, you open it, let it sing for a few seconds before returning it to stillness. Years pass. You teach again, quietly. You choose students not by aptitude, but by kindness. You tell them listen first, then listen deeper. Most don't understand. One does. She's 10, quiet, hums to herself while cleaning the garden. One day, the stone hums back. You say nothing, just smile, because the work is never finished. Alchemy was never about gold, after all. It was about learning to hear what the world really sounds like when it isn't trying to impress you. And now, as the embers of this tale fade into soft, cooling ash, you find yourself far from that palace, far from the heat of the fire, and even farther from the weight of needing to be understood. You're somewhere quieter now, a slow place, a soft one, a place where the wind hums just loud enough to carry the memory of old harmonics, where every creaking floorboard feels like a note in a forgotten scale. The air is still, but not empty. It's full of things you can only hear when you stop trying. The listening stone rests where it always has, waiting, patient, unchanged by the years, but warmed by them somehow. You don't need to test it anymore. You don't need it to sing, because in your breath, in the thump of your slowing pulse, in the way your body eases deeper into the quiet, you realize it already is. The alchemist's journey was never meant to be loud, not grand, not etched in stone for emperors to misunderstand. It was meant for one listener, and that listener, dear one, has always been you. So now, let go of the laboratory, the court, the arguments, and all the fire. Let the resonance fade gently into silence. Let your body soften like cooled metal. Let your thoughts ripple once, then settle. Let yourself rest, and in that rest, may you hear a note of peace. Good night.